Hello and welcome back to the Faith and Justice Show. I'm your host, Mallory Justice. I'm so excited for this week's episode. Now, I will admit, it is a little cold outside. If you can tell through the window, it is very white out there because we are in the great blizzard or snowpocalypse of 2026, where grocery stores were completely sold out and supposedly trees can explode now. I didn't know that was a thing. I just learned that off TikTok like 3 days ago. And the memes from it are very funny. Thank you guys so much for joining this week's episode. So one thing, because I'm still trying to get this podcast idea up and rolling, is one thing I really want to focus on each episode is really reflecting on our week. So a little challenge for you is, what are you grateful for this week? Or in the last 2 weeks. On this week's episode, comment down below and tell me what you're grateful for. I know for me, some of the things I'm really grateful for this week is, one, my amazing friends. I love all of them, my family, and I love all the opportunities that I have been given lately. It's always good to reflect back on the good that's happened, because our lives can be insane and busy. So, lots of things have happened since the last time I recorded this podcast. So, we're going to cover them, state issues and national issues, as well as our topic for the week. So, some very cool state things that have happened is that Delaware's legislative session started January 13th, and we started the legislative session off very strong with some heated sessions in the Senate, as well as the State of the State by Governor Meyer, which was last Thursday, where, he just lit it up on Republicans about wind turbines and making sure that we really push for them. Maryland's legislative session also began on January 14th, and a lot of things are raising concerns with that, like the possibility of a new redistricting map that Governor Wes Moore is trying to push that would congressional, so that would be like your congressmen and your congresswomen, that type of thing, trying to create a new redistricting map, which would add another Democrat congressman here on the shore. From what I believe, the Maryland Senate leader is saying that's unconstitutional, and Governor Wes Moore supposedly just doesn't really care. Another interesting thing that I see that Maryland may be doing is breaking down on gun laws in their state, which nothing from what I've understood is passed yet, but it's been brought up in the House and Senate. So that's definitely something we're going to be watching. Then Virginia. Virginia's new governor and lieutenant governor got sworn in about a week ago, I believe. I highly recommend to go read what the new governor and lieutenant governor have proposed. They're very progressive ideas. National news. I'm going to keep it simple with 2 words. ICE and rioters. I think every time you turn on the news, you're seeing something happening there. Vice President J.D. Vance and Usha Vance just announced that Usha is pregnant and will be having a baby in July. J.D. Vance just out here making history. Youngest vice president, first vice president to have a baby while in office. Way to go, J.D. We love you around here. And then last Friday was the March for Life in Washington, D.C., but it is when hundreds of thousands of people, and they all flood the streets and the National Mall of D.C., and there were speakers like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson who came and spoke, Vice President J.D. Vance. You will march from the National Mall to the Supreme Court in the freezing cold. I have done it in the snow. That was pretty funny. My first year was 2024. I ended up losing all feeling in my body, so I didn't actually make it to the march, but I made it to the pre-rally. And it was snowing, like what it is outside right now. I was an idiot. I was standing out there in the cold. I'm not the brightest sometimes. That's a joke, but also true. Like I said, that's the big state and national news. This week's topic is protest at the pulpit. Is your church ready in case of an emergency? So, we're going to dive deep into that. We hear all across the media that Christians are being persecuted around the globe. A couple months ago, Syria had that whole thing of the Christians being persecuted. Just remember, the world hated me before they hated you. So that's what I like to remember. We keep seeing Trump going on that if countries don't put a halt to this, that you're going to face the consequences of that. Luckily, we've not had to do that yet. Well, Venezuela did, but it wasn't about Christians. But how come we're not really seeing anything change in our own country? Because I feel like, yes, it's happening all across the world, but so much is happening right here in our country. How many of you, like, within the last year, we've seen numerous attacks? So, I mean, back in September, we saw the Church of Latter-day Saints up in Michigan was set to flames. So they were just, a whole bunch of Mormons were in church on Sunday morning, and some guy just decided he was going to set it to flames. Just kind of went, whoop, sparked the match, and the whole place went up in smokes, and 4 people actually died and 8 were injured. Then, I mean, we had Charlie Kirk's death, which even though that wasn't in a church, that was a direct attack on Christians, which is still, in essence, kind of the same thing. And then we also just recently had the attack out in Minneapolis. I'm thinking January 18th is what I read is when that happened. A whole bunch of anti-ICE protesters broke into a church. They entered the building and started intimidating, harassing the pastor, which they believed was a ICE agent, or the acting field, what was it? The acting field director of the St. Paul ICE office out in Minneapolis. These anti-protesters, they came in, interrupted, and instigated the congression during worship service. One protester that was involved was former CNN news anchor Don Lemon, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security have been monitoring the situation and making sure that proper action is taking place. And I want to get this right, so I'm going to read my iPad because I can't really see my TV. So far, 3 rioters have been arrested according to the DHS, or as they stated, the ringleaders have been arrested, and the rioters are being charged under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 241, which makes it unlawful for 2 or more persons to conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person of any state, territory, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him or her by the Constitution or the laws of the United States, or because of his/hers having exercised the same. That is a lot, but that is our U.S. code, so do not mess with that. And then Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said, religious freedom is the bedrock of the United States. There is no First Amendment to obstruct someone from protecting their religion. You know, here on Delmarva, we may think to ourselves, we're pretty well protected. We don't really have anything crazy that happens here. Our churches are pretty safe. We have a church pretty much on every corner. We typically think around here that our churches are pretty well protected. Like, nothing's really going to happen. Your church could be next. I mean, it could be a small Methodist church, Baptist church. It could be one of our bigger churches around here. You never know. So, I want to start with this before I dive into anything. You do not have to be a leader in the church to ask questions. You do not have to be on the board of your church to ask questions. If you can just be a member of your church to ask questions. If you feel that something is not right, if you have questions about what the safety plan is for your church in case of emergency, ask questions. And if your church, as Charlie Kirk used to say back in the day, if your church does not take these things seriously, go find a church that will. We're going to start with that. Start off strong. So, the first thing you should do, as I kind of mentioned it, is find out if your church has an emergency plan in place. So, I know for me, a couple years ago, actually it's not a couple, it's been like 8 years, maybe even longer than that, probably closer to 10 years, when a lot of shootings started happening at church. I cannot remember the details of it, but I remember, for some reason I'm thinking it's 2017, but don't hold me to that. Someone went into a church, opened fire somewhere in the country, shot and killed people and injured them. A lot of churches after this kind of had an emergency plan they set in place So I remember my church that I grew up attending did this, and it was my dad and one of our friends actually were in charge of installing a security plan in the church, installing smoke detectors, and little old Mallory was with her dad because I wasn't allowed to stay home by myself because it was cold outside and there was snow. So dad and I went to the church, and him and our family friends started setting the smoke detectors up in the church. By the end of the day, my nickname was the designer because I was the one saying, okay, the smoke detector needs to go there, there. All right, where are we going to put the alarm at for the door? That was Mallory's job. So just like that, some churches have plans in place, but it never hurts to find out exactly what your church is. And I know there are some churches around here that have started that there will be off-duty police officers that'll come in, and kind of state police officers that'll monitor the service and outside of the lobby. So always ask. In this day and age, you never know what's going to happen. I am going to be using, when I was writing today's episode, I found a really good article that someone actually sent to me. The article is a great reference, and I'm actually going to include it and let you guys read it. So it is the FAQs, What Should Churches Do When Protest Enters the Sanctuary by Joe Carter. Like I said, the first thing you should do that the article states is find out what your church's emergency plan is. So the second thing to keep in mind is that churches are considered private property, a place where American citizens can use their First Amendment right to have freedoms of religion and worship. This does not just mean this can be any type of church. It can be anything. You have, under your First Amendment right, you have the right to freedom of religion and worship. However, it becomes a problem and unlawful if, say, a rider or someone has indication of doing harm inside the church. That's when Title 18, Section 241 of the United States Code may be implemented on you. So, something to dive deeper into regarding this is find out what your state laws are in case an emergency and how the state will react. So, in Maryland's Constitution, I did a little research, but dive deeper if you want. In Maryland's Constitution, in Article 36, that is covered. It's very to the point. You'll face consequences. Yeah. So in Delaware, it is not specifically stated, but in Article 1, Section 1 of the Delaware Constitution, it is stated that the state is to restrict activities that disturb the peace, safety, or happiness of society under the guise of religion. So, that's in Delaware's code. Now, Virginia I actually did find interesting, if it has not changed yet. In Virginia, if, say, criminalization enters your church, it is considered a Class 1 misdemeanor. In Florida, it can be a third-degree felony. And then, shockingly, in California, if this happens, penalties can be a $1,000 fine, 1 year in jail, or possibly both. Maybe Maryland and Delaware need to dive deeper into analyzing criminalization entering a church and what the state's going to do about it. So, just my opinion. And maybe I missed something, but that's kind of what I gathered. If a problem arises like a protest or whatnot, the top thing to do would be to de-escalate the problem. So, within your churches, if this arises, you need to have people who are willing to negotiate and de-escalate the problem. Not everyone should do this. Personally, I know how I am. I know I seem so calm and natured. I am actually like the most feral person and will debate you to the end of till I know I'm right and you're wrong. And even if I know I'm wrong, you're not going to know I'm wrong. So, I would not be the person to de-escalate this problem because I may make it worse. So, having certain people in place for that is a very smart idea. Then, you need to have other people willing to protect the people in your congregation. So, moving them, like your children, your elderly, just moving everyone to a safe place within your church or even outside in case the problem worsens and then people become in harm's way. And then, in the end of the day, someone better be calling 911 to get the cops there so that the problem is erased. And then, a great quote that I loved from this article that kind of sums it all up is "The church welcomes sinners, not disruption" by Joe Carter. And I think that's very true, especially in this day and age. we've gotten to a point of, we're all sinners. Everyone's welcome into the church. And, I bet out in Minneapolis, when that pastor had to face this problem of the protesters breaking in, harassing, instigating everything they were doing, breaking into the place of worship, he probably wanted to, at the end of the day, to make sure that they at least got some word of it. They broke into a church. They probably most definitely needed some Jesus in their lives. But at the end of the day, no one should be breaking or entering into a church unlawfully and causing harm. We're all sinners, but that does not mean disruption and causing chaos within a church. Just to kind of sum it all up, you don't have to be a leader. You can just be a member of your church. If you have questions, make sure to ask them to your leaders to be able to make sure that your church is protected so that this does not happen in any other churches in the country, or especially right here on Delmarva. And then, people are what makes a church. So, you have the power to protect your place of worship. You are in God's kingdom. You have the right to protect your land. Remember? I pulled that from last episode. You have the right to protect your place of worship and your religion, because it is covered on your First Amendment right. Make sure you know, ask questions, and really just be willing to stand against the evils of the world. I want to thank you all for tuning in this week. I know last week I left you with some homework, so I'm going to do it again. Told you to go read the first couple chapters of Genesis, which I hope you did, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to leave you with homework this week. And to kind of tie it into what this episode was about, I want you to go read 2 Corinthians 10. So this chapter dives deep into Paul defending his ministry. It's literally the title of the chapter, so it seems very fitting. That's what I just covered. And one verse that really stood out to me, and we all think of it in an essence of ourselves, that no weapon should be formed against us. But really, no weapon should also be formed against any body of Christ. So that could mean a church. That could mean someone. So 2 Corinthians 10:4, so that's from the chapter. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. So when we all unite as Christians, if this happens within our churches, and we have a plan, we can, sorry, my nose is just gotten incredibly itchy. Not that you needed to know that, but if you're wondering what I'm doing. But for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. So make sure to go read the entire chapter to just get a little bit deeper understanding. Thank you all for joining this week's episode. All of our episodes will be posted on YouTube, and then I will share the link on Facebook, just so then you're not watching a 20-minute episode on Facebook. So make sure to go follow the YouTube, The Faith and Justice Show, so that you never miss an episode on there, and to stay informed and up to date of what is happening on our show, or even what I'm up to, because sometimes I've been posting, especially on Instagram, Bible verses or things that I'm seeing, little motivation things that I think we all need to know. So to stay up to date on those, make sure to go follow our Facebook, Faith and Justice, and go follow our Instagram. It's called @Faith and Justice Show is the Instagram, and Faith and Justice Show is the Facebook. My name is Mallory Justice, and this is the Faith and Justice Show. I will see you all on next week's episode.